Okay, this is an introduction to, well, this is going to be part 2 of the cardiovascular system. We've already done part 1, which will be blood, and then part 2 will be the heart, part 3 will be the blood vessels. And in this lecture, we're just doing some basic introduction to heart location and some structures in the wall of the heart and around the heart. Okay, let's see. First of all, let's look at the location of the heart. I'm going to outline the manubrium. Here's the manubrium here of the sternum. Here's the sternal angle. So there's the manubrium, that part of the, if you're poking somebody right here, you're poking them in the manubrium. And here's the body of the manubrium. And here's the xiphoid process. So it's just to get your bearings. And then we have our ribs coming in, attaching with the cartilages to the sternum. We have the clavicle up here. So you get your bearings, so we know where we are. Because over here, when we talk about the mid-clavicular line, you have to know that that is named because it's in the middle of the clavicle, and it's going to intersect another location called the fifth intercostal space. So it's good to know where your bones are, right? Some other things to be aware of. The heart lies in the mediastinum. Right here is the mediastinum, the central portion of the thoracic cavity. Overall, this is the thoracic cavity. But the heart is within the mediastinum, but we usually don't leave it as mediastinum. We call it the pericardial cavity. Pericardial cavity. So the heart lies within the pericardial cavity, within the mediastinum, within the thoracic cavity. And then laterally, we have the lungs, which reside in the pleural cavities. If we look inferiorly, we have this, see the diaphragm, this muscle, it's a very thin muscle, and it goes over on top of the abdominal organs and the lungs. Here's lung 1, here's the right lung, here's the left lung. Over here, they sit on the diaphragm, and the heart sits on the diaphragm as well. And then the diaphragm is going to be this bell-shaped organ that flattens out when it contracts, and when it relaxes, it goes up. So it goes up and down and up and down, and so your heart and your lungs are going to move as the diaphragm contracts. There's a basic something for you to know. Notice that the left lung over here is smaller than the right lung, and that is because the heart is deep to the sternum, and most of the heart lies to the left of the sternum. And when you look at the heart, you're not looking at equal right and left sides of the heart. We'll see in subsequent pictures that the right side of the heart takes up most of the front of the heart, and the left wraps around the back, which sometimes confuses students. The pointy part down here of the heart is called the apex. And if you see the apex, you know you're on the left side of the heart, just straight up. There's the left side of the heart. And recall that the heart is, if it's housed in this pericardial cavity, if we do the pericardial cavity like that, the heart fits snugly within there. We're going to draw it like this. And if you remember way back in last semester, we did serous membranes. Serous membranes reduce friction. I'm saying this word, serous membranes, or the serosi, but the serous membranes reduce friction. And so if it lines the body cavity, it's called the parietal layer. And then it extends and wraps around the organ, around the outside, and that will be the visceral layer. So we would say that this, lining the pericardial cavity, this is going to be the parietal pericardium. Most people have trouble with this. But if the membrane is on the outside of the heart, because the heart is an organ, we call it the visceral layer of the serous membrane. And the location is around the heart, so it's the visceral pericardium. For some reason, it's not labeled on this picture, but you see, let's see, I can't even figure out how they've done it, but go by this. I can't even tell their color scheme. But here they have labeled the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura in the pleural cavity. So the visceral pleura will be snug on top of the lungs, and the parietal pleura will wrap around and line the inner pleural cavity. And so when you breathe or when your heart beats, because of these serous membranes, there is serous fluid. Think of the viscosity of the fluid as like an egg white viscosity that's raw, and it's real slickety, and you can't feel your heartbeat and you can't feel your lungs breathe. So that's a good thing. So don't forget about your serous membranes. What else do we want to mention on this picture? On this side, I think we're good with the anterior view. I will say that all these big blood vessels leaving the top are called the great vessels, and we'll get to know each one of them, where they're going or where they're coming from, or what part of the heart they're leaving or what part of the heart they're going to. If we look on this side, here's that midclavicular line, and it goes down the mid-clavicle on both sides, but on this left side here, when it gets down to the fifth intercostal space, and as this name suggests, it is the space after the fifth rib. So this first rib starts underneath your clavicle. Here's clavicle. And the first rib is underneath it. And then the second rib, third rib, fourth rib, fifth rib. So here below the fifth rib is that fifth intercostal space. And that is where the apex of the heart resides, on the left side. And so you can easily palpate. That means to feel, to palpate. Let's see. Right here is an area where you could feel the heart. And where this midclavicular line in the fifth intercostal space is where you put the V4 electrode for like an electrocardiogram. So this is a good thing to know, this actual anatomical location here. Anything else? Second intercostal space. The second intercostal space is a space beneath the second rib. And it's an easy way, if you're listening, auscultate. If you auscultate, you listen. If you're listening for heart sounds, it's easy to find the upper valves for the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. Okay, let's move on. We'll come back to that stuff. Let me erase this. Clear on drawings and move on. It will let me. It doesn't let me unless I do all the right steps in a row. I get to hold my mouth right. Okay, here we go. Serous membranes. We just did the serous membranes up there. We mentioned that they are to reduce friction. And in this case, we can clearly see these serous membranes on the outside of the heart, snugly fitting on the outside of the heart. We have what's called the visceral pericardium. You can also call that the epicardium because it's upon the heart. And then we have the parietal pericardium that's lining this body cavity. So what is this white thing on the outside of it? If you go into someone's chest and actually look at their heart, it's in a really thick, fibrous, tough sac. So that fibrous, tough sac is called the fibrous pericardium. We have pericardium is the overall membrane that goes around the heart, and it's made of two layers, the fibrous pericardium, which from the outside just looks like a tough collagen sac. And then if you cut into that and open it up, lining the inside, we're going to have this parietal pericardium, part of the serous pericardium. And then on the heart itself, we'll have the visceral pericardium. You really have to be in there to see that. And it's hard if you're just dissecting a heart itself and not an actual donor. So, or a cadaver, because these things are just hard to envision, but one day you'll get to see them. So here is that fibrous pericardium, and it's attaching to these great vessels. And I want you to be aware of this thing right here. There's a little line. We'll come up to that later. And it's just a sac, and it is very tough. I mean, it's very tough, the fibrous pericardium is. And so it helps to prevent the heart from overfilling. Filling, that should be F-I-L-L-I-N-G. I have a little bit of an accent. So it prevents overfilling of the heart. And if something does happen and we get too much fluid in here, too much serous fluid, or just too much fluid altogether, it has this back pressure on the heart and the heart won't be able to beat. And so that would be cardiac tamponade, not a good place to be when you have too much serous fluid in this space here and it presses back on the heart. Now, pericarditis is inflammation of these membranes. Which membranes, pericarditis? The parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. So this means inflammation, itis, around peri, the heart. Because we'll run into the word endocarditis. Now, if you have that, that would be itis carditis. That would be inflammation inside the heart, literally lining the inside of the heart. If you had myocarditis, that would be inflammation, M-Y, myocarditis. This is the best my handwriting gets. This is inflammation of the heart muscle. So you have to listen to the words. The words are important. They're very specific. Endo, myo, and peri are in different locations altogether. So here are those words. Again, here's epicardium. That means upon the heart. Myocardium, and this means tissue, by the way. So this is around the heart tissue. This is muscle, heart tissue, and endocardium would be inside of the heart. So we see these in different layers. We see the nice blue here. This endocardium is made of simple squamous cells, and the simple squamous cells are also called endothelial cells. So these endothelial cells, they line our heart and they're continuous with the great vessels that leave the heart. So endothelial cells line blood vessels and the heart itself on the inside. The bulk of the heart is made of muscle. And here we say that nice woven cardiac muscle in here, and that is called the myocardium. So here we have the myocardium. Here's the endocardium in blue, myocardium in whatever color that is to you. And the epicardium, it consists of this simple squamous epithelium, but it's also on a loose connective tissue. So here's the outer portion of the heart, the very outer portion. So those are your heart layers. Please know them. Which area of the heart do you think would be inflamed with endocarditis? This guy, right? What about myocarditis? Oh, that would be this part. How about epicarditis? There. So just be aware. And on here, instead of epicarditis, we just said pericarditis because epi is upon, peri is around, same. All right, so on the blood flow, let me see if there's anything else I need to mention on here. I don't think that there is. Notice that these, if we looked microscopically, we would know that these little cells of the heart they look like a pair of pants, and they're usually uninucleate, can have more than one nucleus. They're striated, and when they attach to another cell, this area right here is very dark staining, and that's called an intercalated disc. And so here we see an intercalated disc. Here we see one. Here's one. Here's one. Here's one. And microscopically, where these cells are, it stains very nicely because at this region, we have lots of gap junctions. So the cells can speak to one another. And because gap junctions are made of proteins, they stain darkly so you can see them. And we have desmosomes. Desmosomes are also called the adhering junctions. And what they do is if we have two cells that are going to be pulled apart, as heart muscle will be pulled apart, when each muscle cell gets short, fat, and bunchy, it pulls away from its neighbor. But we don't want the heart cells to rip apart, and they won't because they're connected by, this is what I'm going to draw to look like a desmosome. Proteins between them with these little guy wires that run through the cell for support. Okay. Here's the last part of this lecture. We're talking here about pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. So pulmonary versus systemic circulation, I'm moving this to see if I can't see my label to see if pulmonary systemic circuits. can't see my label to see if I labeled it right. Notice how we have the left side of the heart, wherever this guy is. That's the apex, right? And it's got a really thick wall. And here it looks like the left and the right side are together. Try to change my pen color. But they're not. They're separated. The left side of your heart and the right side of your heart are completely separated from one another. It's like you have these two pumps that work side by side. And on the right side, you notice that the blood is blue. That's because it's low oxygen. On this side, low oxygen, high carbon dioxide blood. Why is it low oxygen and high carbon dioxide blood? Well, the blood coming in to this right side enters into the top of the heart and then goes to the bottom. And where it's coming from the body. All the tissues of the entire body, that all the blood that goes into the right side comes from your feet, your arms, your liver, your stomach, your brain, your ears, whatever we're talking about. The blood empties into the right side of the heart. And that blood that's coming from those tissues, say this is your toe, your left big toe. The blood that's coming from your left big toe goes up and eventually makes its way to the heart. And it has picked up all this carbon dioxide from the toe cells, which are doing aerobic respiration and making ATP. And in the process, you're always using up oxygen and making carbon dioxide. And so that's why we need this. And our cells are out here. So the blood coming to the tissues has high oxygen, and the oxygen leaves, and we end up with a lot of carbon dioxide in the blood. So as we're entering in the right side of the heart, we have low oxygen, high carbon dioxide blood, because it's draining, it's taking the carbon dioxide away from the tissues, and the tissues have used up all the oxygen. So where are we going to get more oxygen? Well, what's going to happen is when this low oxygen blood comes into the right side to the top of the heart, it's going to go to the bottom of the heart, which is the ventricle, a pumping chamber, and out it will go to the lungs. And so what we've described, when we send blood just to the lungs, and the purpose is to get rid of this carbon dioxide that we've picked up. So we want to get rid of the carbon dioxide, literally it looks like it's just coming out the side of your lungs, but the blood, when it goes to your lungs, carbon dioxide diffuses into the lungs and you exhale and out it goes. And we're breathing in oxygen. So oxygen goes from the inside of the lungs to the blood, and carbon dioxide is going in the opposite direction. So in the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary circulation, this has to do with the right side of the heart. And we're receiving low oxygen blood from the body, sending it to the lungs to pick up more oxygen. Now we pick up our oxygen and dump off our carbon dioxide, breathe that out, breathe in oxygen. And here, and notice when we're coming from the lungs on both sides, we're entering in to the left side of the heart, the top of the heart. It's called the atrium. It's going to go down to the ventricle, and then that's going to be pumped out to the body. So in the pulmonary circuit, we're sending blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, and go back to the left side of the lung. The left side of the heart, excuse me, the left side of the heart has to do with systemic circulation, meaning it's going to send blood to all your body systems, all your body tissues. So in systemic circulation, this is dealing with the left side of the heart, and we're also dealing with high oxygen because we got it from the lungs, and low carbon dioxide blood because we got rid of it with our lungs when we exhaled. So take some time to study this picture and know that you're going to send blood to the lungs to get oxygen, and then that oxygenated blood will be sent to the body. Here it's showing you when we leave the heart as oxygenated blood, we can either go up to the head, anything above the diaphragm. This could be any capillary above the diaphragm, or it's going to go down below the diaphragm to any capillary bed in the body. I hope this becomes more intuitive when we get to like the respiratory system and when we get to part 3 of the cardiovascular system. But for now, that's where I'm leaving it. You might need to read your textbook 100%.